Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Community America Credit Union. My name is Joel Goldberg, and today's guest I feel like I can relate to in a lot of ways, even though in many ways I could never do what he did, in part because he played professional basketball, including in the NBA. But the parts that I could relate to, along with certainly the love of sports, is I think that the creative side, the writing side, the sort of second journey side, which I'm going through a lot right now with my speaking career, still doing it while working a full baseball schedule. So I'm kind of lucky enough to be living in both worlds. But I was introduced recently through a connection to Paul Shirley through my friends Casey and Corey Wright. And Casey, I've mentioned it many times on this podcast, is the president of Chief of Staff Recruiting in Kansas City. He said, hey, I know this guy just a little bit that you've got to meet. He played basketball at Iowa State. He played professionally in the NBA. And so Paul Shirley, he was a National Merit Scholar, an engineering major at Iowa State University. I'm glad it's Iowa State, not Iowa, being a Wisconsin guy myself. Paul played for 17 professional basketball teams in a 9-year career, had stops in Spain, Greece, Russia, and 3 teams in the NBA. And then here's where, to me, it gets interesting beyond basketball, and really why I wanted to have him on. This is so much more than sports. He's the author of 2 works of nonfiction, Can I Keep My Jersey? And Stories I Tell on Dates. And he's written a first novel, Ball Boy, that was out in February. And there's another coming, which we'll talk about. Paul is also the founder of The Process, which helps freelancers and creatives find structure, accountability, and community online and in person. Don't we all need that? He's also the author of a book called The Process is the Product, or at least will be the author. That's the one that's coming out later this year in December. That is a long way of me introducing Paul Shirley to the podcast. Paul, welcome in Rounding the Bases.
Thanks, Joel. I'm going to try not to let people down. That was a lovely introduction. And as I was listening to it, which I think happens to all of us, right, where you forget sometimes the things that you've done because you're so worried about what you're doing right now. So it was actually a rather pleasant little trip down memory lane. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice when you have accomplished as much as you have. And I know, like so many guests on this podcast, that I think I know, just having met you via email and talking a little bit before we came on, that there's so much more coming. I've yet to have a guest on that said, yep, I'm done. That's it. So as long as that resume may sound to others or even to yourself, to me, in many ways, we're all just getting started. And that's the beauty of the journey. And that's where I wanted to start with you. I want to talk about your background, certainly, and growing up and playing basketball. But what I really want to focus on to start is this post-basketball journey, because so many athletes, they wrap it up, whether it's long, successful careers, shorter careers. I think yours was probably in the middle in terms of time. And it's like, okay, then what? Now what? And there aren't a whole lot that go down your path. I'm wondering, was this always a passion of yours, writing and that creative side? Did you want to be an author growing up?
Not even a little. I was a reader, and I don't think, honestly, that it occurred to me that I could write, which there's a part of me that's a little frustrated with the English teachers I had growing up, because they never seemed to make it fun. It wasn't until I realized, like, oh, you can actually have fun with this, much like you can have fun with interviewing people, right? When you have that realization, things start to unlock. I don't know that I had a lot of long-term dreams beyond when I was a kid growing up. I wanted to play professional baseball. That was it. I was going to be a baseball player and play for the Kansas City Royals someday. And then at some point figured out that I had this facility with basketball that kind of outpaced whatever facility I had with baseball. And then that became the dream, right? I'm going to play college basketball at Kansas, and I'm going to go play for the Boston Celtics for 15 years. And I don't know that I thought beyond that. I don't know that as a kid, we do think much beyond that. It's interesting thinking back to, like, when you were 8, what were your dreams? Like, I had sort of ephemeral ones about, like, wanting to be a professional athlete, but I definitely wouldn't have said I'm going to write books someday, because that seemed really boring. But then through a series of events, I really got into writing. That started when I went off to Greece, which was my first professional job. I'd had a friend the year before who'd played professionally in Spain, and he would send out these email updates to friends and family about what he was going through. And I resolved that if I ever got to play professionally, I would do something similar. And then sure enough, got to Greece, and it was wacky. And I started sending these emails to friends and family. Quickly realized that if I made them funny, then people would write back and I would feel less lonely. And just kept doing that and built up this weird like list serve of people that I would send this email out to. Then did that for 3 more years, just kind of as a hobby. I thought at some point, like I will turn this into a book when my career is done. But then was playing for the Phoenix Suns, which mostly means I was watching the Phoenix Suns. And their web people came to me and said, "Hey, man, do you want to write a blog for our website?" It was 2005. That was still fairly newfangled at the time. And I think I actually know they thought that they would take whatever scribblings I put down and turn it into something serviceable, not knowing that I had kind of built up this shtick for the last 4 years. That got the attention of some media outlets and led to a book deal in the middle of my career, which was not something I had ever planned on. But kind of as I mentioned, like it was, I think more because I enjoyed the job of entertaining people that a book got written. It wasn't like I set out to write a book. It was much more organic in that I loved making, not just like making people laugh like funny ha, but also just sort of like exposing them to this weird world of what it was like to be a middling professional basketball player. People basically can understand what Shaquille O'Neal's life is like, kind of like it's easier to understand, and it's fairly simple to understand like what the guy who played at college and then never played professionally, his life is like. But what people didn't know about was the people like me who were just total journeyman mercenaries that, you know, one thing going wrong might have meant the end of my career, but one thing going really right might have meant my career gets extended by 3 years. And so that tension, I think, led to a lot of material of just like what it's actually like for those of us that were in the middle of it.
I'm so fascinated by this because what you're describing, a couple thoughts that pop into my head. First is, I think we all think that we know and understand Shaquille O'Neal or fill in the blank, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, because they have all the exposure. So we identify with them, and maybe we dream of what would it be like, you know, to have hundreds of millions of dollars and all these homes and the this and the that, and you know, more the movie star lifestyle. Yet the reality of it is that most fans are probably going to relate more to the Paul Shirleys of the world, the Journeymen of the world, not in the sense of talent. I always tell people that the last guy on the bench, that the last player on the baseball roster, the 26th man, is better than almost everybody in the world. And they maybe don't make it like the biggest superstar, but put them in a gym or on a field or on the ice or wherever it is, and they will win against just about anyone in the world. But we don't see them as much, but yet there's a grind to it, a survival to it, that I think most of us, if we're let in on that, can relate to. And I think that, I'm guessing that's probably led to a lot of your successes, opening that window to a world that's much more relatable than what a Shaquille O'Neal is, and understanding that at any given moment, you're living in this make or break world, when if Shaq misses a big shot, if LeBron misses a big shot, if Giannis misses a big shot, they'll be okay tomorrow. They're going to be okay. Am I reading all that right?
You are. I think that was reflected in the reception to that first book. Some people loved it because it reminded them of their own lives. Like if you are an investment banker fresh out of college, your existence is not dissimilar to my existence, right? Where there's a lot of pressure on you to succeed and you don't know if it's going to work and you're not sure what that world is going to be like. I mean, that could be true if you were a teacher. That could be true if you were a low-level broadcaster, whatever it might be. And so there was a certain amount of, I think, realism attached to that. There were also, though, people who didn't want their impression of professional athletics to be ruined. So some people it actually annoyed that I would talk about like this from a realistic attitude or perspective. Because I think, and I'm sure you've seen this, there are people in the world who sort of want to believe that professional athletes are almost like cartoons. They don't really want them to be real people. And I would actually postulate that sometimes that's because they have some dreams that didn't come true with athletics themselves. And like, if you remind them, like, these guys just get out of bed like you do, it actually like shines the spotlight on them. And they're like, well, but why didn't I make it? Like, where did I go wrong? So I saw that a fair bit where, you know, some people really loved getting this version of professional basketball, and other people really hated it. They really didn't like to be taken out of that world. Because of the book, I had an agency, an entertainment agency, William Morris at the time, which is now William Morris Endeavor. And because of that, got a TV agent, and he said, hey, why don't you come up with an idea for a TV show? And I was like, what about Wise Cracking 12th Man? And he's like, that's gold. We're making that. So I, in the middle of my career, stopped playing, moved to Los Angeles, and we made a TV pilot that ended up not airing. So, you know, you probably know this, but not everyone will, that studios will maybe order 12 pilots to get made and only put 3 or 2 of them on the air. And we spent a bunch of Fox's money, but we never went to air. And I think one of the drawbacks of that show was the tone got mixed up. We set out to make a show sort of taking the piss, as it were, about what it's actually like to be a professional athlete. And then as more and more executives got involved, they wanted to see the glitz and the glamour. And I remember them coming to me one time. They're like, okay, so we're going to put a bar on the team plane. Would it look like this? I was like, there's no bar on the team plane. Everybody's exhausted. And they're not going to just like encourage you to drink right after the game. That would be insane. And the joke is always, it's less glamorous than what people think. But there was, again, that tension between like what people really want sometimes is to believe that it's a cartoonish world that they have no access to. And when you show them that it's kind of boring, in a lot of cases, they actually get frustrated because it sets up that cognitive dissonance that people are almost universally uncomfortable with.
It's interesting too, because I find whenever I see certain shows, I mean, I remember, like, you know, I've got doctor friends that never enjoyed the show ER because it's not realistic enough, right? And I forget the name of the show that's out there on Apple TV right now about Jennifer Aniston's in it. It's like morning news, like, you know, like the Today Show, morning show, and people love that. And I was just like, I'm not feeling it. Like, this wouldn't happen. You know, and I never worked with Jennifer Aniston. That's not fair either. But no, I mean, but that's what television and movies do, right? They have to be able to glamorize it, and that's so they want the Charles Barkley world. They don't want the Paul Shirley world. They don't want the Joel Goldberg world, and so I guess that's probably the challenge. Just out of curiosity, and then I want to actually move back a little bit to growing up in small town Kansas. But when you find out that pilot has not been selected, okay, fine, you make your money still. What's that feeling like? Is it a gut punch? Is it just business? Is it personal or no?
It was, by that time, I was so fed up with the world of television that I was, I think, kind of ready to get out of it. And interestingly, so we spent $3.6 million of Fox's money making this pilot. And not to be, it's not like I actually didn't technically write the pilot. It was based on my stuff, and I was a producer and creator and all that. But I got paid $10,000 for a year of work on that, which I think speaks also to how I felt at the end, because I had gone into it, this optimistic kid from Kansas. I was 26 years old at the time. I was like, oh, everybody's telling me this is going to be really fun and that it'll pay off in the end. And then it was just over. And then there was nothing. I was like, well, what, aren't we going to go like take it to other networks or something? And they're like, nope, it's, you know, once you've like taken your shot, nobody else cares about it. So I felt really chewed up by it. And was not, I mean, I was disappointed in the same way that you would be about any kind of failure.
Sure.
But it was not catastrophic. I was very happy to go back to being a basketball player. By that time, I was 26 turning 27, I guess. And I had kind of submarined my basketball career because the book was coming out soon. And I honestly thought, you'll maybe appreciate this, Joel. I thought I'm a marginal NBA guy. Like at best, I'm going to be somebody's eighth man. Not unreasonable. Like I was good enough to, if I had played 10 years in the NBA, you would have been like, I don't know, he's fine. But I was also easily forgotten. I could have never played in the NBA and everybody would have been fine with that. And I thought, like, if I can be the guy at the end of the bench who like is vaguely creative and clever, that will actually help my standing with the teams. I was wrong. My agent was like, now that you've written this, you're not going to play in the NBA again. Which again, at that point in my career, I was kind of okay with because playing overseas was fine. I played in Spain, which was a lovely experience. And kind of moved on down the line. But I guess that goes back to the original question in a way of like, what do we all dream of? We dream of certain things and then life happens and you adapt and change course a zillion times, especially in this day and age where, you know, when we were growing up, right, everybody thought these are the 6 careers you can have. You could be a doctor, lawyer, fireman, police officer, construction worker. That's it. Now nobody really knows what anybody does. You sit down on an airplane and somebody will say something and you have to spend 45 minutes figuring out what it is they actually do with their days. So I guess what we're all learning as the world evolves is that none of us is probably going to do exactly what we dreamed of because that job may not even be around by the time we get there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because even for me, I always feel like my situation is different because I ended up doing what I dreamed of and that's not always relatable. I knew what I wanted to do from the time 8, 9, 10 years old, turning the volume down on the TV, not on the remote, going up to the TV and turning it all the way down and then calling the games, you know, I mean, but I wasn't envisioning that I would be the pre and post game show host for the Kansas City Royals. There weren't even pre and post game show hosts back then. So I bring that up only because the dreams are never exactly right, even if you're close to it, because the world changes, everything changes. Certainly that has happened right now. So before I talk about the books and your company, which is really fascinating to me, or the rest of your books and your companies, is small town Kansas. What did that childhood do to you, or how did that affect you growing up? I mean, eventually you're on the big stage, even if it's the 12th man on the bench or whatever it is. I mean, how many people in your town growing up? How many people in your high school graduating class?
55 in my graduating class. I grew up in Meriden, Kansas, which is a population of about 700. And I would say that, I mean, it's interesting thinking about like, I don't know what it's like to grow up anywhere else. So it's difficult to compare to anywhere else. I think a vaguely cloistered childhood was helpful. I grew up raising cows and chickens and, you know, learning baseball in the backyard and learning basketball in the same place on a gravel driveway. I feel like being allowed to be a kid was really valuable. Being allowed to explore, you know, go down to Mrs. Barnes's 80 acres and wander around and be left to our own devices was valuable. It's something that I had this novel come out this year, and it's about a kid whose single mother moves him from Los Angeles to a small town in Kansas. The small town in Kansas is fictional, and it's also like a way cooler town than Meriden. But I think I wanted to remind people in the wider world that there's a lot of value in that smallness and that sense of connection and community that comes from a small town. Meriden, I'll be honest, is like it's almost part of the Topeka sprawl, if there ever was one. So it doesn't quite have the same self-contained nature as maybe like your idyllic small town that you think of. But there was still that, I think, a lot of value in the principal knowing who you were, in us knowing that there was one homeless guy in town named Leonard that picked up the cans and bottles, and that he wasn't necessarily a second-class citizen, right? He was just, that's Leonard. That's what he does. I think there was a lot to that I have really valued, that allowed my upbringing to be a bit of a crucible for then sort of getting me ready to go out and explore the world, even though it doesn't seem like, you know, being from a small place might make people think then that you would not be able to achieve a cosmopolitan attitude. In some ways, it built that confidence in me to think like, well, I could do this anywhere. And so then appearing in the middle of Barcelona on a date with a girl isn't quite as intimidating, even though that's sort of counterintuitive, which, you know, I hadn't really thought about until now. So thanks for making me think about that.
I love it. Hey, yeah, you never know where this is going, but you know, where my mind goes, I told you before we went on that I don't like to predetermine a list of questions other than the baseball theme questions, which we'll get to, because I just want to see where it goes. And I think, you know, with you, we could go and we'll continue to go in so many different directions. What I'm thinking about now is here you are growing up in the outskirts of Topeka, this small town. And, you know, it'd be really, I think, too oversimplified to say, okay, you know, the small town kid makes it big. I mean, people get out of small towns all the time, or choose to stay for that matter as well. But I mean, you're suddenly living this life of, you know, traveling Barcelona, traveling the world. My goodness, if you hadn't played in Europe, you're still playing in Madison Square Garden and places like that I can't imagine a whole lot of people in fill in the blank small town or big town for that matter could say, boy, what must it be like to play in Madison Square Garden? I mean, there had to have come a certain point where you're like, yeah, this is my world. Or maybe not. I don't know. I mean, what was that like to finally be on the big stage?
There were a lot of pinch me moments. I really think the bigger transition was actually going off to college to play college basketball, because I played at Iowa State, we were at the time really good. And, you know, my junior and senior year, we never lost to Kansas, which was a point of pride. And my junior year, we went to the Elite Eight. Senior year, we're number 2 seed, the fourth ever number 2 seed to lose in the first round. But we were good, and I remember that kind of a national stage. So in a lot of ways, I was already playing at a near professional level, but that was coming from a town of 700 straight to that. So actually moving to the pros was not nearly the shift. Like when I remember playing my first summer league game and thinking, for those who are uninitiated, a lot of times, like I was not drafted, got invited to play the NBA's summer league with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were god awful at the time. And I remember being, of course, terrified that I was going to screw this whole thing up. But in some ways, the NBA game, at least like at that level, summer league is like kind of your quadruple A would be the analogy in baseball terms. I remember thinking like this game is actually a lot easier than college, because in college everything was so intense and so physical and so like contained. The NBA court was kind of wide open because it's just bigger, right? There's the 3-point lines further out. It actually made a lot more sense to me in a lot of ways, and was almost more intuitive. It reminded me more of like high school basketball. College basketball, we should not forget, is like a lot of times you just recruit as many athletic dudes as you can and just like send them to crash the proverbial boards. And there was a skill level in the NBA that I think I actually really enjoyed, because I always sort of played like a European player anyway. So anyway, I think the bigger transition was I'm playing at Allen Fieldhouse, or we're playing the University of Cincinnati, who's ranked number 1, and we're both in Hawaii, and we're 2 of the 5 best teams in the country. And those were the pinch me moments where I'm like, I can't believe somebody's letting me do this. Not in a like hokey, I'm so grateful to be here. There was some of that, but by the time you're, you know, a junior or senior, you've had that beaten out of you pretty good. It was more like, I can't believe it's me that's getting to do this. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just pretending. But I guess nobody else knows what they're doing, so it might as well be me.
I'll say this, and then I'll move on from the basketball. Those Iowa State teams were really good and a lot of fun to watch. I mean, I wasn't a Big 12 guy. I wasn't here yet at that point. I think up in Wisconsin and then down in St. Louis. But enough that a young me, and I know we'll need to get into all this, that you know, your coach got into some trouble on some things at certain points, but there was a point before all this white hair that I had the same shaped face that some people thought that I was like Larry Eustachy's twin or body double
Really?
or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't.
Did you?
It's a lot of years ago.
Did you ever put a mock turtleneck on to really?
Well, you know,
crank that up?
back in those days, like at least on TV, the mock turtleneck with the suit was kind of a thing. So that might have
Right.
brought it on too. Like when I see old pictures now, my wife, we were together then, or dating, still looks back. She's like, "What were you doing?" Anyway, that's a whole different story. Let me fast forward. I get off on tangents, but let me fast forward a little bit to the to the company or multiple endeavors that you have, which I think, if I'm understanding it, reading it, and talking to you a little bit, is very much about helping people. And I know that one of the topics or pushes for you is helping people push aside distraction and focus. So that's certainly something that writers have. We all have, right? I mean, it's so hard to lock down with all the distractions nowadays. How much of a passion has this become for you and helping others?
I think we mentioned before you and I were talking, the book, The Second Mountain by David Brooks. People may or may not love David Brooks, but I like the concept that he introduces, which is that one's first mountain is the ego-based mountain, the accomplishments, the money, fame, whatever it might be. And that one's second mountain is the realization that real happiness comes from helping other people. I think one thing he writes well about is that there needs to be a valley between the two. It took me a long time to figure out like what I wanted to do next. Not because I was so well off that I had a lot of time to spare. I averaged making about $85,000 a year as a professional athlete, which is great compared to, some things, but it's not enough to set you up for life when you're 33. So I needed to figure that out pretty quickly. I thought that I would be a famous author. Like I thought, well, you write books and people pay you for it, and that's how it goes. And it took a pretty aggressive rejection of what would have been my second book for me to realize, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. First of all, I need to find some people who do. And that led to the creation of this thing in LA called Writers Blok, which was basically a co-working space for writers. Along those years, or in those years, I started to put together that it didn't really matter that it was writing. It was more that we had built this set of like structured writing sessions, and that this was translatable not just to writers, but really anybody that was doing freelance work, creative work, and in the end, kind of everything. And that what I'm seeing from the world is that there are a lot of people who are just so distracted, so inundated with information, who still want the same things we've always wanted, right? Like we want to be connected to the things we do every day. We want to have an in-depth conversation, you and I. But if there's, sirens going off or alerts from our phones, that becomes really difficult. In the same way, we want to be connected to our jobs because we started those jobs for some good reason, and we want to do that in a meaningful way. So therefore, this is all begat this thing called The Process, where we are helping people set aside or work through distractions so they can focus and concentrate and work deeply and meaningfully again, which, it is a little conceptual, because a lot of what we talk about is this idea that the term gets overused, right? But it's the truth. You have to fall in love with the process. The process has to become its own win, right? Like you will never achieve enough or gain enough wealth or get enough women or whatever the thing is to make yourself happy. But if you can be happy in the moment, if you can achieve this state of flow, like I used to feel when I was playing basketball or practicing basketball, like I sometimes feel when I'm writing, like I sometimes feel that when I'm giving a talk. I'm sure, Joel, you've felt that feeling where you're just so in the moment, you're in a flow state, and it's truly addicting. That I think is worth pursuing, and that's what I get excited about helping show people, in part because it feels really good, and also because there's a lot of like functionality to it. People will come to us and be like, I got more done in 3 weeks than I've gotten done in 3 months, because we finally get them to see like, oh, if we can just get you to concentrate for 20 minutes, that's better than you being sort of vaguely attached for 8 hours.
I totally get every bit of what you just said. It's something I'm still always searching to get better at. I don't think I've really I don't even want to say I've come close to mastering it. I think I'm just learning it because of all the distractions, and it does feel good when you're in that moment. I know for myself personally, I've been finally starting to experiment and mess around with meditation and different focus tools because I feel so much better, and I'm just scratching the surface. That's a little bit of what you were talking about too with David Brooks in the book, and that other mountain, or what I sometimes call the back nine. I'm not a good golfer, but just starting to search for new ways, better ways, digging deeper, which I think comes later in life, and passing on what you know. But the website, by the way, is createyourprocess.com, and I like, it's very simply spelled out. I want to ask you one more question on this. It says, what we do, we train improved human performance and meaningful productivity with an emphasis on developing focus, concentration, and self-motivation. Who we're for? Our members are freelancers and creatives looking for structure, accountability, and community. So it's not necessarily just someone aspiring to be an author. It falls under, I think, a wide realm, an umbrella. And then it says how to think about us. And I like this analogy. We're the Peloton of productivity and human performance, but instead of riding a stationary bike with like-minded people, you'll be working on your ability to focus, your connection to your long-term values, and your capacity for deep work with like-minded people. And as I'm reading all of this and I'm thinking about your passions now in life, I'm curious how much this has helped you redefine your purpose.
One thing that I was joking about with my mom on the phone the other day was growing up in that small town where we grew up. We actually had come from somewhere else. I was actually born in Redwood City, California. My parents had me while my dad was doing a postdoc at Stanford, of all things. And so we were new to the small town of Meriden, Kansas. And I can so vividly remember, and this is what my mom and I were talking about, feeling like we were being kept out because we didn't know all of the little details about how you signed up for Pee Wee baseball, or what the joining the Cub Scouts was like, or how the 4-H club worked, or whatever it was. And I feel like I always kind of internalized that feeling of being an outsider and hate it, and want to demystify some of this stuff for people. I've seen it with writing. I have seen it with basketball a lot. Like I always talk about how growing up, you go to basketball camps, and these guys would come in from Washburn or K-State or wherever, and the guy running the camp would be like, all right, so-and-so, what's the key to making it? And the guy would be, well, it's all hard work. I shoot 1,000 shots a day. And I remember as a kid being like, whoa, that sounds difficult. So I tried it out, right? I am at the time very wee small town kid, but eventual professional athlete, right? And so I tried out 1,000 shots and my right arm was going to fall off. It took 5 hours. I was like, there's no way that these guys are telling the truth about this. But I didn't have enough confidence to really say that out loud. It wasn't until many, many years later when I would just see the things that people would say versus what they would actually do that I realized, like, those people were full of shit. Like, they don't actually shoot 1,000 shots. They might have done it once, like for fun, just to see if they could. But then it became part of the stories that they would tell themselves, almost as a way to keep other people from being able to do it. Because they'd be like, I'm going to say it's so difficult that you will never be able to do it. Now, with that said, these things are not necessarily easy, but they are simpler than people realize. It's a lot simpler to come up with like habits and routines that you can do every day than people think it is. And then you look up and like suddenly you're playing in the NBA or you're writing a book or whatever the thing is. It just doesn't have to be such a like mystery. I think a lot of times people who are on the inside want to keep it a mystery to keep other people on the outside. And that's, I think, where the deep rooted passion comes from, is like not wanting other people to have to go through that feeling that we went through of like feeling like you're always on the outside and you don't have the information.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Totally makes sense too. In really almost any profession where we all want to, this is a little bit of a different topic, but I mean, we all want to get to the end without going through the journey, and we want to know those little secrets, and a lot of those little secrets are not that sexy,
Right.
but
yeah,
but
I mean, it's like you talk about, right? Like it's the small things, and it's the things that they seem mundane. They sometimes seem rigid. It seems boring to have to, like, I'm I will always write books. I don't care if I'm a famous author someday, really. I mean, it'd be great to be a famous author, but I'm not. It's not the all to end all.
Yeah.
But I still, so it's every day having to talk myself into writing for my hour. So there's a lot of days where I'm like, this is going to be terrible. I'm not going to be able to do this. I don't have the wherewithal or the self-confidence or the self-discipline. But then I go to the coffee shop and I get my coffee and I'm like, well, there's a line by, it might be a Hemingway line. God, I wish I knew this off the top of my head, but he says, I have 2 rules for writing. I don't have to write, but rule 2 is I can't do anything else. So like it's that thing of I'm going to be here, so I might as well do some writing. And it's of course, as you said, it's not just writing. It's, if you're a graphic designer, it could be in your relationships, right? Like there's a reason people have date nights. It sounds kind of rigid and like unsexy, but if you set up that framework within which to work, your rule for date night is we don't have to talk to each other, but we can't talk to anybody else. So we might as well start having a conversation and like move this relationship along in its way. I think that's what it also just gets me excited because it's kind of everything. It's that idea that like we all need these systems in our lives, kind of whether we want them or not.
It really does. It applies to everything. I mean, my mind's going all over the place with it. And, I'm regularly asked by college kids or even high school kids, essentially they're asking what's the secret to get to where you're at. Mm-hmm. And they don't like when I tell them it's about building trust and relationships and, it's like, yeah, but what do I need on the resume tape and who's the person, and it's like, yes, all that, but no one in school, and this is so much of what you're doing now too. I mean, it's what you're doing is small ball to me, if I'm going to steal the phrase that I use all the time, but no one taught us in journalism school at the University of Wisconsin, or anywhere for that matter, how to build trust and relationships with athletes or subjects that you're interviewing. They taught you how to ask the right question.
Right.
Debatable whether we do that or not. But, you know this as well as I do from your playing days. You are more likely to give some insight and deeper answers to the media that you'd built some relationships with. And that takes effort every single day.
It reminds me of at Bob Chipman's basketball camp. He was the head coach at Washburn, which is in Topeka, and we would go there frequently. And he said at some point to the 100 of us sitting there, like, the best thing you can do is keep your eyes on me when I'm talking. Like I'm going to watch you play, right? And some of you are going to be better. Some of you will be so clearly better than the others that like there's just no doubt. But most of the time, it comes back to these like little intangible things. And I think when I think back to my basketball career, if we're reasonably objective, I was between the 250th and 2000th best basketball player in the world, somewhere in that range. I was not like, you can tell the top 25 or 50, like you're like, those guys are better than everybody else. But then it starts to get pretty gray. And one thing I figured out pretty quickly was be nice to the trainers, be nice to the strength coach. When I get to the European team, try to say a phrase in their language, look people in the eye, shake their hand. Like these things are boring, but that is what like kept me in a job half the time was just, I don't know. He seems okay. He seems fun to be around. Like he's not going to be a problem. And that like put me ahead. Like it's, like you were saying, it's so boring. Things like don't miss the team bus. Just don't screw up. And you'll probably be, because again, most of the time people are pretty lazy. They don't really want to have to go out and replace someone. So as long as you just don't screw it up, they'll probably let you stick around.
There's a role for the 12th man, or now in baseball, the 26th man, that is always there if you pay attention to those things and treat people right. Those guys bounce around. Guys that bounce around from team to team do so for one of two reasons. They either have absurd talent, but they wear out their welcome, or their talent's not as good, but they don't wear out their welcome, and they can fill that role without having to worry about it. And there's a lot to be said, and that translates to everyday life. It really does. So it's everything that we're talking about. Okay, let me get to the baseball theme questions. First one, career-wise, whether it's basketball, post-basketball, what you're doing now, books, the 12th man movie, whatever it is, what's the biggest home run you've hit?
It was getting to go to Iowa State because I was a National Merit Scholar. There was a day in school where they handed out a test called the PSAT, not the SAT, right? The SAT you go take on the weekend. The PSAT at my little town, they were just like, we think this is a practice for the SAT, but you probably won't have to take the SAT because you're going to go to school in the Midwest, which is a very short-sighted way to think. And I was hyper competitive. And so I was like, well, I'm going to see how well I can do on this practice test. And I did well enough that I was a National Merit finalist, which is fine, great. But the point is that I had been recruited mostly by Division II schools, some Ivy League schools, some NAIA schools, a couple of Division Ones, but like small ones, and told the University of North Dakota no at some point. I was like, it's too cold, North Dakota, I'm not coming there. The assistant coach at North Dakota, a guy named Steve Krafsison, called Iowa State. Tim Floyd was the head coach there. He had been an assistant at Iowa State. He said, there's this kid in Meriden, Kansas, nobody knows about. I think he's good enough to play in the Big 12. You should go check him out. Tim Floyd did, in fact, come check me out, but he was out of scholarships and said, you seem great. Why don't I connect you with an old assistant of mine at Southern Mississippi? But then my mother, second time she gets referenced in this conversation, looked into it. And at Iowa State, if you're a National Merit finalist, you can go to school for free. So therefore, we were able to call Coach Floyd back and say, do you want a basketball player for free? And he was like, of course I do. So I got to go to Iowa State under the guise that I was on scholarship. I had one condition, and that was you cannot tell anybody that I'm on an academic scholarship because I feel like they'll perceive me differently. And he got a free player. I got to play at a very big Division I school, and it was all because I was competitive about taking a test my junior year of high school.
That's a whole nother lesson for every kid out there, by the way. You don't have to be doing it for the basketball scholarship, but wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that, and really amazing.
I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier about, like, I thought I'm going to go get a Division I basketball scholarship. I ended up getting to play Division I basketball, and I was on a scholarship, but they were not completely connected. They were related, but not completely. And I think, like, so many, and you've dealt with this your whole career, I'm sure, of these guys that have weird, perplexing paths to the major leagues. And that is true, like, of almost every profession.
It's real life.
I deal with, right? Where there's no chart, there's no map. You know, my map was fitting that I have a map behind me, but that was not on purpose. It was just winding my way toward, like, and stumbling a lot of the times toward, like, some kind of success.
Yeah, everybody's journey is different, and we come to learn that they're all unique, which is, I think, actually really cool. Biggest swing and miss you've taken, and what did you learn from it?
That second book. So I was so convinced that that this was my path, right? That basketball was done. I was 32. I was 33. I was feeling good because I was still young. You know, like, there are a lot of guys, if you play until you're 40, it becomes really difficult to get that second thing going, I think. And so that rejection and that come to Jesus moment where I realized, like, whoa, I do not know what I'm doing. I got to ask for some help. And importantly, I need to build a community. I think one thing I loved about my basketball days was, you know, you'll hear guys who are like, God, I missed the locker room, right? Well, I don't know if I missed the locker room per se, but I loved the chance to get to go to new places and meet new people and like, and just find out about the world through the eyes of others, and also commiserate and be reminded that, like, my foibles and suffering was similar to somebody else's. So that then taught me very quickly, like, I got to find a tribe. I got to find other people who are doing what I'm doing. And I hope I will not lose sight of that awareness that, like, I always just need to be around other people and let that support system develop.
Last one on the baseball theme questions. I feel like we've covered it in different ways throughout this, but I'll let you kind of find one answer to lock it in. What is small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the big results?
It's to fine tune maybe what we were talking about before. I think so much of it for me has become how I start my days, in that I generally don't like it when people self-label, because we're not very good at self-evaluation, but I will say that I'm in general a people pleaser. I struggle because I have a hard time I will just say yes, like, yes, I'll help with that, whatever. So it has taken me some time to put aside the feeling that I'm being selfish by starting my day with the things that are most important with me or to me. But that has become really valuable, that I start my day before I've turned on my phone. I have eaten breakfast, I've listened to some music, I've read a little bit, I've meditated, I've written, and I've exercised. And then I can turn on my phone or access my email, which then allows the world to kind of come flooding in. And I think that, people talk more eloquently than I about these ideas of setting your intention. But I think that is important, where we say, here's what matters to me to start my day. And then from there, once I've established that bedrock, the world's going to kind of wash over it like a river and start to wear that away. And that will be okay, because I have at least established the foundation of how I'm going to run my day.
I'm in such the early stages of trying to do that right now. And on a good week, I'm starting that off with a little bit of those elements. I don't have all of them yet for 10 minutes. And on a bad day, it doesn't happen, but it's slowly becoming habit. And I could see it, you could feel it. It changes the whole trajectory of your day. I think it kind of, I don't know, kind of grounds me and centers me before I jump into the deep end. I want more of what you're talking about, but it's like everything else. It's habit forming, it's practice. And so I'm trying to make that part of the routine, but I love that small ball answer. All right, I wrap it up and we'll go quick here with 4 final questions as we round the bases, just stuff that's come up. Although one you tipped me off on, you won a coloring contest as a kid. This was a big deal, right?
Really, it was my first bit of celebrity, was winning the North Topeka IGA's coloring contest, getting a $25 gift certificate to that IGA and buying nothing but drumsticks with it. Do you remember drumsticks?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They were like,
we're not talking about the instrument drums. We're talking about the ice cream cones.
The ice cream cones there. Like, as a kid, we always had the absolute trash ice cream that was the Neapolitan in the 5-gallon bucket. It's uneatable. Inedible is a better word, Paul. And so getting to purchase some drumsticks with my very own hard-earned gift certificate money was quite the treat in North Topeka.
All right, the early celebrity of Paul Shirley. Second question will be my basketball question. Best teammate you ever had and toughest opponent?
I was not teammates with this guy for very long because I got cut after 3 weeks, but I so loved Kevin Garnett, which came as a surprise because when I showed up for training camp with the Timberwolves, this was after the TV experiment. I was now 28 or 29, and I'd been around the NBA long enough that people kind of knew who I was. It was before training camp. We're playing pickup games, which is sort of the informal start to training camp. And I'm on the sideline needing to pick guys up for the next game. And Garnett walks out to the free throw line. He's like, I don't know who this white boy is, but somebody better tell him to get off my court before I lose my mind. Because he just didn't know. He legitimately didn't know who I was. And I thought, I either have to go punch Kevin Garnett in the face or have to do what Kevin Garnett says, and chose the latter because I'm a sissy, I guess. But in the course of training camp, learned that he was so passionately loyal to the people he knew and that were kind of in his circle that I think, even though that was off-putting for me at the beginning, it made sense. And it was also, in retrospect, kind of endearing because he had such a hold on this is my Minnesota Timberwolves team and I don't want interlopers in here. And by the end was very sad that I didn't ever really get to be a full teammate. I was a preseason teammate of his. Toughest opponent. I, in the Big 12, often had to sort of play small forward. And I remember having to guard Paul Pierce. And I was poorly equipped for that in college. As I got older, I maybe could have handled it, but not when I was 18. I really vividly remember feeling very exposed when having to guard Paul Pierce at Allen.
Interesting. What a cool cool thing though. Kansas kid playing at Allen Fieldhouse, but having to guard Paul Pierce. All right, third question as we round the bases. You traveled all over the world. What was your favorite stop?
It I think has become slightly passe, but Barcelona is the best city. And the fact that I got to live in Spain for 2 straight years, which meant that I really felt a part of the culture. But Barcelona is undefeated in my brain as a place that everybody should try to live in for a little while.
All right, final question, the walk-off. This gives me a chance and hopefully you a chance to be able to promote what is coming up at the end of the year, another book. The process is the product. I know that you sent me an early version, an online version, and it's fascinating. I mean, and your writing style is amazing, but the way you jump right in there, I mean, I felt right from the beginning that you're taking your readers back to an innocent time, I guess is what I'd call it. Small town America, which doesn't look the same today as it did back then. I mean, I really, I could feel it, and everything else. No, it's just, like the, dinner. And I think you were writing about radar, and it just, it brought me back. And I didn't grow up small town, but it still brought me back to an innocent time. Tell me about this book.
The theme is, as we've discussed a little bit, this idea that you'll never ever achieve happiness based on some sort of end game, right? That it always comes back to it's not just about falling in love with the process, but turning your process into your product. If there's a way you can figure out how to reward yourself according to, I did this today and that's enough, that you will not only have this like trajectory of success, but you will also find a sense of meaning and fulfillment because you're connected to that moment and to that day to day.
Well, I encourage everyone to look out for it, and maybe we'll follow up, in December and continue the discussion. The book is The Process is the Product. It is out December 21st or December of 2021, probably not on December 21st. And the website is createyourprocess.com. You and I could go for, I think, at least on my end, for hours more as we're doing this. I got a manager's press conference via Zoom, because that's the world we're living in, coming up in a minute. So I guess I should cut it short, or maybe we went long. Either way, it was a really incredible conversation. I'm grateful for it. Congrats on all the success and so much more to come, and for just sharing so much insight with me today too. So Paul, Shirley, thank you so much for coming on Rounding the Bases.
Thanks, Joel. It was a pleasure to get to synthesize some of this stuff. I think one of the underrated pleasures of getting to be on a podcast is that you then are forced to sort of think about, what in the hell am I talking about? So I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing. It certainly got me thinking a lot too, which is one of the selfish benefits of this podcast is what I get to learn and hopefully pass it on to others. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Joel. See ya.